Translate this, and maybe you'll earn your place at this table. Laughter, low, expensive, dismissive. She takes the contract anyway, hands steady, eyes sharper than anyone notices. Then, you're about to lose 100 million. Silence crashes. He smirks, until she points to a single clause. A date that shouldn't exist. A law already dead. They think she's guessing. She's not, because she's seen this trap before, the same signatures, the same quiet manipulation, the same people who erased her life. And tonight, they just walked straight into hers again. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of Leonard as Khalil al-Rashid adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time in 5 minutes. At 34, the billionaire tech mogul had built an empire that spanned 3 continents. But tonight's merger with the European banking consortium would cement his position as the youngest Arab billionaire to crack the Fortune 500's top 10. Mr. Al-Rashid, your table is ready. The maitre announced with practiced reverence, gesturing toward the restaurant's most exclusive corner booth. Khalil's sharp obsidian eyes swept across the dining room, mentally calculating the net worth of every patron. Old habits from his days clawing out of poverty in Dubai's forgotten neighborhoods. The scent of truffle oil and aged wine filled his nostrils as he followed the maître d', his Italian leather shoes clicking against polished stone. I'm expecting 3 associates from Geneva Private Bank, Khalil said, settling into the plush velvet seat. When they arrive, ensure absolute privacy, no interruptions. The merger documents lay spread before him like battle plans. 200 pages of legal jargon that would transfer controlling interests in 12 European financial institutions into his hands. His fingers traced the embossed letterhead as memories of sleeping on cardboard boxes flashed through his mind. Every acquisition was proof that the hungry child from Al-Karama had conquered the world that once rejected him. Would you care for wine while you wait, sir? The voice stopped him cold. Not the growly tone of their usual waiter, but something melodic, almost musical. Khalil glanced up, expecting to see another polished server in the restaurant's signature black uniform. Instead, he found himself staring into the most unusual pair of eyes he'd ever encountered. Not quite brown, not quite gold, but something in between that seemed to shift in the candlelight. The young woman couldn't be more than 20, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and skin that suggested Middle Eastern heritage, though something indefinable marked her as different. "You're new," he stated rather than asked, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. "Yes, sir, this is my second day." Her voice held a slight tremor, but she maintained eye contact with surprising dignity. "I apologize if I'm disturbing your preparation. I can send Andre if you prefer." Khalil studied her more carefully. Most servers in establishments like this possessed either the practiced obsequiousness of career hospitality workers or the desperate eagerness of those grateful for any employment. This girl displayed neither. Instead, her posture suggested someone trying very hard to appear smaller than she naturally was. "What's your name?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with the casual dominance that had intimidated board members across 5 countries. "Illa, sir. Lebanese. Palestinian, sir." The slight lift of her chin carried just enough defiance to intrigue him. Interesting. And what does a Palestinian girl know about wine selection for a man about to acquire half of Europe's banking sector? The question was designed to embarrass, to establish the natural hierarchy between them. Khalil had learned early that keeping people off balance prevented them from becoming too comfortable, too presumptuous. But instead of stammering or apologizing, Ila tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "I would suggest the 2015 Domaine de la Romaine Conti," she said quietly. "It's bold enough to match your ambition, but refined enough to complement the gravity of your achievement." Khalil's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. The wine she'd suggested was not only the most expensive bottle on Leonard's legendary list, but also happened to be his personal favorite, a detail not listed anywhere on the menu. "How did you know that vintage I didn't?" "I guessed." Her honesty was either refreshing or foolish. In his world, the two were often synonymous. But if you're conducting business that will affect European banking, you'll want something that speaks to both power and sophistication. That particular Romani has a reputation for both. Before Khalil could respond, his associates arrived in a flurry of expensive cologne and nervous energy. Enrich Weber, senior partner at Geneva Private Bank, led the group with the purposeful stride of a man carrying documents worth more than most counts' GDP. Khalil, my friend Hinrich's German accent carried across the dining room as he embraced Khalil with European formality, ready to make history always. Khalil's attention shifted to business mode, but something made him glance back at the young waitress. She had retreated to a respectful distance, but those unusual eyes remained fixed on the documents Heinrich was removing from his briefcase. Her expression had changed. The nervous deference was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like alarm. "Gentlemen, shall we begin?" Khalil gestured to the seats around the table as Illa approached with their wine selection. As she poured the Roman Conti, her hands were steady despite their slight tremor earlier. When she reached Hinrich's glass, Khalil noticed her pause almost imperceptibly, her eyes scanning the open contract on the table. "Will there be anything else?" she asked. But her voice carried a different quality now. Less timid, more concerned. "Privacy," Hinrich answered curtly. "This conversation is not for civilian ears." Ila nodded and began to withdraw, but something made Khalil call out to her. "Actually, wait." He couldn't explain the impulse, but something in her expression intrigued him. "You mentioned you could guess things about wine." What else can you guess about Hinrich shot him a look of confusion, but Khalil ignored it. There was something about this girl that didn't fit the simple narrative of a struggling waitress grateful for employment. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." "Documents. Can you read documents as well as you read wine preferences?" The question hung in the air like smoke from expensive cigars. Hinrich shifted uncomfortably, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but Khalil found himself genuinely curious about her answer. "I can read, yes, sir." "In how many languages?" The question surprised even him, but those eyes. There was intelligence there that seemed at odds with her circumstances. "5, sir." The table fell silent. Hinrich's associates exchanged glances, while Khalil leaned forward, genuinely intrigued for the first time in months. 5 languages. A Palestinian waitress who knows vintage wine and speaks 5 languages. He reached for the contract, his movements deliberate and theatrical. How interesting. Before Heinrich could object, Khalil held up one section of the document. The text was dense legal language, a mixture of English and German with technical terminology that would confuse most attorneys. "Read this section out loud." Hinrich's face flushed red. "Khalil, this is highly irregular. We're discussing confidential." She signed a standard employee confidentiality agreement, I'm sure. Khalil's tone brooked no argument. "Didn't you, Illa?" "Yes, sir." "Then read." Illa took the document with hands that no longer trembled. As her eyes scanned the page, something remarkable happened. Her entire demeanor transformed. The nervous girl disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with quiet confidence and intellectual precision. This section outlines the transfer protocols for the Basel III compliance requirements. She began, her voice now clear and authoritative. "However, there's an inconsistency in paragraph 7. The regulatory framework referenced here was superseded by the European Banking Authority's revised guidelines in March 2024. Any contracts relying on the older framework would be legally void within 6 months of signing. The wine glasses might as well have shattered from the silence that followed. Henrich's face had gone from red to pale while his associates frantically rifled through their briefcases. Khalil felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Illa continued, her voice gaining strength, "that whoever drafted this contract is either incompetent or deliberately trying to create a legal loophole that would invalidate your acquisition after you've already transferred the funds." Heinrich shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. A waitress questioning documents prepared by Geneva's top legal." "She's right." The voice came from Marcus Webb, Heinrich's junior associate, who had been frantically typing on his phone. The EBA guidelines she mentioned, they're real. Updated 6 months ago. Jesus Christ, Henrik, how did we miss this? The restaurant seemed to spin around Khalil as the implications crashed over him. $100 million. That's what he would have lost if he'd signed the contract without this discovery. $100 million saved by a 20-year-old waitress who supposedly just knew how to carry plates. Who are you? The question came out harder than he intended, but Khalil felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Illa set the contract down carefully, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal something vulnerable underneath. Just someone who believes people should know what they're signing, sir. But Khalil's business instincts were screaming. This wasn't luck or coincidence. No one knew regulatory banking law at that level without serious training. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face, searching for clues he'd missed. Henrich, we're done for tonight. His voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. Obviously, you need to review your documentation more carefully. As the banking associates gathered their papers with embarrassed haste, Khalil never took his eyes off. She stood perfectly still, as if waiting for judgment, but something in her posture suggested she was prepared to run. When the table finally cleared, leaving only the two of them in the corner booth, Khalil leaned back in his chair and studied the young woman who had just saved him a fortune. "Sit down, sir. I should return to my other tables. Sit down." This time, it wasn't a request. Illa slid into the seat across from him, with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to high-stakes conversations, despite her humble uniform. Now Khalil said, his voice dangerously quiet, "Tell me who you really are." The candlelight flickered between them, like a living thing casting dancing shadows across Illa's face as she met Khalil's penetrating stare. Around them, the restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of Manhattan's elite, but their corner booth felt isolated from the world. "I told you, I'm a waitress." Her voice was steady, but Khalil caught the slight tension in her shoulders. Waitresses don't typically know obscure European banking regulations well enough to spot fraudulent contract clauses. He leaned forward, his business instincts fully engaged. They also don't usually speak 5 languages or recommend $20,000 wine bottles with the confidence of a sommelier. Layla's fingers drummed once against the table before she caught herself. Such a small gesture, but it told Khalil everything he needed to know. She was calculating, measuring her words with the precision of someone who had learned that honesty could be dangerous. People contain multitudes, Mr. Al-Rashid. Surely a man who built a tech empire from nothing understands that appearances can be deceiving. The response was elegant, deflective, and told him absolutely nothing. It also revealed she knew exactly who he was, despite never being introduced. "Clever, but you're avoiding my question." Khalil signaled to Andre, who appeared instantly with the discretion that came with 15 years of serving Manhattan's power brokers. "Bring us coffee, the good coffee, and ensure we're not disturbed." As Andre retreated, Khalil studied Layla's reaction. Most people became nervous when trapped in conversation with him. His reputation for ruthlessness was well-earned and carefully cultivated. But this girl seemed more resigned than afraid, as if she'd been expecting this moment. "You saved me $100 million tonight," he said quietly. "That kind of favor typically comes with expectations attached." "What are yours?" "I don't have any expectations, sir." "Everyone has expectations. The question is whether they're honest about them." The coffee arrived with swift silence, giving Khalil time to analyze the way she held her cup. Confident, grip-perfect posture movements that spoke of training and etiquette most waitresses never received. For instance, "I expect you to tell me why someone with your obvious education is serving tables instead of practicing international law." "Well," Illa's cup paused halfway to her lips. "What makes you think I studied law? Because I studied law Oxford, actually. And the way you dissected that contract wasn't amateur intuition. It was professional analysis. You knew exactly what to look for, because you've done it before." For the first time since sitting down, genuine surprise crossed her features, followed immediately by something that might have been fear. "I don't practice law anymore." "Why not?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Khalil watched her internal struggle play out across her face. The war between truth and self-preservation that he recognized from his own climb to power. Because lawyers require references, credentials, a clean professional history. Her voice carried a bitterness that spoke of recent wounds. All things that become complicated when your previous life explodes spectacularly. Your previous life. Yes. Which was illicit down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Does it matter that life is over? It matters because you're sitting in one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants, casually preventing international financial fraud while pretending to be a struggling waitress. Either you're the most overqualified server in New York, or there's a story worth hearing. Something in her expression shifted. The careful mask slipped just enough to reveal exhaustion that went bone deep. You really want to know? Her voice carried a challenge of its own. Fine. 2 years ago, I was a junior partner at Blackstone and Associates in London International Corporate Law, specializing in Middle Eastern and European banking regulations. I had a corner office, a 6F figure salary, and a fiancé who happened to be the senior partner's son. Khalil felt his attention sharpen. Blackstone and Associates was legendary in legal circles, one of London's most prestigious firms, handling acquisitions that shaped global markets. What happened? I discovered my fiancé and his father were using my regulatory expertise to help clients hide money laundering operations through legitimate banking channels. When I threatened to report them, they destroyed my career, my reputation, and my life. She met his eyes with defiant honesty. They made sure I could never practice law again anywhere in the world. The pieces began falling into place. A brilliant lawyer with specialized knowledge cast out from her profession and forced into survival mode. It explained the 5 languages, the wine knowledge, the ability to spot fraudulent contracts, and the bone-deep weariness that radiated from her despite her professional composure. So you became a waitress. I became invisible. Sometimes that's the safest thing to be. Khalil found himself genuinely impressed. Most people who fell from such heights crumbled completely. This girl had adapted, survived, even found a way to use her skills when it mattered. The resilience reminded him of his own journey from Dubai's slums to Manhattan's boardrooms. Invisibility is overrated, he said finally. Especially when you possess rare talents. Talents that got me exiled from my profession, destroyed my relationships, and cost me everything I'd worked for. Layla's laugh held no humor. Forgive me if I'm not eager to make the same mistakes twice. What if I told you those weren't mistakes? The question seemed to surprise her. What do you mean? You chose integrity over comfort. You chose truth over security. In my experience, those are rarely mistakes even when they're expensive. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her features. Easy to say when you're worth billions. Integrity doesn't pay rent. No, but it does something more valuable. It reveals character. And character is the rarest commodity in my world. The way she looked at him then made Khalil realize the conversation had shifted into territory he hadn't intended to explore. This wasn't just professional curiosity anymore. Something about her combination of strength and vulnerability was awakening instincts he'd buried years ago beneath ambition and calculated relationships. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I think we might be able to help each other. I'm not interested in charity, Mr. Al-Rashid. Good, because I'm not offering any." Khalil leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone that had closed billion-dollar deals. "I'm offering a job." The words seemed to echo between them. Layla's expression cycled through surprised suspicion and something that might have been hope before settling into careful neutrality. "What kind of job?" "The kind that uses your actual skills. I need someone who understands international banking law. Someone who can spot the kind of trap that nearly cost me 9 figures tonight. Someone who isn't already owned by the financial institutions I'm acquiring. You need a lawyer. I need your specific expertise and your specific perspective." Khalil paused, letting the offer sink in. The question is whether you're ready to stop hiding behind invisibility and start using your talents again. Ila stared at him for a long moment, and Khalil found himself actually nervous about her answer. When had the opinion of a 20-year-old waitress become important to him? What would be expected of me? Due diligence on acquisitions, contract review, regulatory compliance, the same work you did in London. Except this time, you'd be working for someone who values honesty over convenience. And the salary? Khalil named a figure that made her eyes widen despite her attempt to maintain composure. It was more than generous. It was transformative. The kind of offer that could rebuild a life. That's a substantial offer for substantial work. I don't make small investments, Leah, in businesses or people. The weight of his words settled between them. This wasn't just about employment. It was about resurrection, a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her, to use her brilliance for something meaningful again. I'd need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, but don't think too long. Khalil rose from the table, leaving payment that would cover both their evening and a generous tip for the staff. Opportunities like this don't wait indefinitely. As he prepared to leave, something made him turn back. Illa was still seated, staring at the contract pages Hinrich had left behind, her expression unreadable. One more thing, Khalil said. What you did tonight, spotting that fraud. Why did you speak up? You could have stayed invisible. Let me sign the contract, avoided getting involved. She looked up at him with those unusual gold-brown eyes, and for a moment the careful walls she'd built around herself seemed to crack, because I've seen what happens when good people get destroyed by others' greed. I couldn't watch it happen again, even to a stranger. The honesty in her voice hit him like a physical blow in his world of calculated relationships and strategic alliances. Such genuine concern for another person's welfare was rarer than diamonds. Think about my offer, Illa. But remember, sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all. He left her sitting in the candlelight, surrounded by the evidence of her brilliance and the promise of a future that seemed impossible just hours before. And for the first time in years, Khalil al-Rashid found himself hoping someone would say yes to him rather than simply expecting it. 3 days passed before Illa found herself standing outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Al-Rashid Global Enterprises. The building stretched toward the Manhattan sky like a steel and crystal monument, to ambition, its surface reflecting the city's relentless energy. She'd walked past it twice, gathering courage before finally approaching the security desk in the pristine marble lobby. I have an appointment with Mr. Al-Rashid, she told the security guard, smoothing her one professional blazer with nervous fingers. It was 3 years old and showed the careful maintenance of someone who couldn't afford to replace it, but it was clean and pressed. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt endless. Through the glass walls, Manhattan spread out below like a circuit board of light and movement. She tried to ignore the way her reflection looked small and uncertain against the backdrop of Khalil's empire. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that belonged in an architectural magazine. Everything was sleek lines and expensive materials designed to intimidate and impress. The receptionist, a stunning woman who looked like she'd stepped off a fashion runway, barely glanced up from her computer. Layla Nazir to see Mr. Al-Rashid. Illa announced, proud that her voice remained steady. He's in a meeting. You can wait. The dismissal was polite but absolute. Illa settled into one of the leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent and tried not to fidget. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see other office towers stretching toward the horizon, each one representing dreams and ambitions and fortunes won and lost. Miss Nazir, miss. She looked up to find a tall man in his 40s approaching, his smile warm and genuine. Unlike everyone else she'd encountered in the building, his demeanor suggested actual human warmth rather than corporate polish. I'm David Chen, Mr. Al-Rashid's business partner and oldest friend. He asked me to speak with you while he finishes his call with Tokyo. David led her down a hallway lined with modern art and past offices where serious-looking people conducted the business of global finance. His office, when they reached it, was marginally less intimidating than the reception area, but still spoke of significant success. Coffee, water, something stronger? David asked, settling behind his desk with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Coffee would be nice, thank you. As David prepared their drinks, Illa studied him carefully. In her legal career, she'd learned to read people quickly, their motivations, their loyalties, their potential as allies or threats. David Chen radiated the kind of steady reliability that spoke of deep integrity. So he said, handing her a steaming mug, "Khalil tells me you saved him from a rather expensive mistake the other night. I simply pointed out an inconsistency in a contract. An inconsistency that would have cost him 9 figures. That's quite a catch for someone who's supposedly just a waitress." The comment wasn't accusatory, but Illa heard the unspoken question. She took a sip of coffee. Excellent quality, she noted, and considered her response. "I studied international banking law before my circumstances changed. Khalil mentioned you were interested in joining our legal team. I'm considering his offer." "Yes." David leaned back in his chair, studying her with intelligent eyes. "Can I be frank with you, Miss Nazir, please? Khalil al-Rashid is one of the most brilliant business minds I've ever encountered. He's also one of the most driven, demanding, and occasionally ruthless people you'll ever meet. He expects excellence, demands loyalty, and has no patience for mediocrity or deception." Illa felt her spine straighten. "Are you trying to discourage me from taking the position? On the contrary, I'm trying to prepare you for what working with him will be like." David's expression grew serious. "But I'm also wondering why someone with your obvious qualifications is serving tables instead of practicing law." The question hung between them like a test. Illa had prepared for this conversation, practiced different versions of the truth that might satisfy curiosity without revealing too much. But something about David's straightforward manner encouraged honesty. "I made enemies in London. Powerful enemies who ensure I can't practice law anywhere in the world." "What kind of enemies?" "The kind who don't forgive whistleblowing, even when it prevents criminal activity." David nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "That actually makes me feel better about recommending you." "Really, why?" "Because it means you chose principle over profit. In our business, that kind of integrity is rarer than you might expect." He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. "Khalil built this company from nothing, you know. Started with a laptop and a dream in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. Every acquisition, every merger, every success has been earned through intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to compromise his principles. That's impressive. It's also lonely. Success at his level tends to attract people with ulterior motives. Employees who want access to his wealth, women who want his status, business partners who want his connections." David turned back to face her. What he needs, what the company needs, is someone who values competence over personal gain. Before I could respond, the office door opened and Khalil strode in with the confident energy that seemed to precede him everywhere. Today, he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she'd made in 6 months of waiting tables, but it was his presence that filled the room, rather than his expensive clothing. "Illa, thank you for coming." His attention focused on her with laser intensity. "I trust David has been entertaining you with embarrassing stories about my early failures." "Just establishing context," David replied with a grin. "I was telling Miss Nazir about your commitment to integrity in business dealings." "Ah, the integrity speech. That means he likes you." Khalil settled into the chair next to Illa, close enough that she caught the subtle scent of his cologne. Something expensive and distinctly masculine. "Have you had time to consider my offer?" The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised her, but Illa found herself momentarily tongue-tied. This close, she could see the intensity in his dark eyes, the sharp intelligence that had built an empire, and something else, a hint of vulnerability that he probably didn't realize he was revealing. "I have several concerns," she said, finally, such as references for one. "As I mentioned, my previous employers aren't likely to provide positive recommendations. I don't need their opinions. I need your skills. Professional credentials are less important than proven competence. You've already demonstrated both your legal expertise and your integrity." "What else concerns you?" Illa took a breath-gathering courage for the conversation she'd been dreading. "The salary you mentioned is far above market rate for someone with my employment history. It makes me wonder what additional expectations might be involved." The question hung in the air like smoke. David's eyebrows rose slightly, and Khalil's expression grew very still. When he spoke, his voice carried a coldness that reminded Illa exactly how dangerous it could be to misjudge powerful men. Let me be absolutely clear, Miss Nazir. I am offering you a position based solely on your professional qualifications. Any implication otherwise is both insulting and inaccurate. The ice in his tone made her stomach clench, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. I apologize if I offended you, but given my past experiences with powerful men in professional settings, I needed to establish boundaries. Something in her voice, perhaps, the echo of old pain seemed to penetrate his anger. Khalil's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained watchful. What happened to you in London? I trusted the wrong people with the right information. It cost me everything. Illa met his gaze steadily. I won't make that mistake again. Good. Trust should be earned, not given freely. Khalil leaned back in his chair, and when he spoke again, his voice had returned to its normal tone. The position I'm offering is legitimate, professional, and based entirely on your legal expertise. The salary reflects both the complexity of the work and the value I place on integrity. Nothing more, nothing less. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by embarrassment at her own suspicions. I'm sorry I had to ask. You had to protect yourself. I respect that. Khalil stood and moved to David's window, his silhouette sharp against the Manhattan skyline. The question now is whether you're ready to start rebuilding your career or if you're content to remain invisible forever. The challenge in his words stung, but it also awakened something she'd thought was dead. Ambition. For 2 years, she'd focused solely on survival, on staying hidden, on avoiding the kind of risks that had destroyed her life in London. But looking at Khalil's empire spread out below them, she felt the first stirring of hunger for something more than mere existence. If I accept, she said carefully, what would be my first assignment? Khalil turned from the window, and the smile that crossed his face was both triumphant and genuinely warm. Due diligence on a potential acquisition in Dubai, a telecommunications company with some very interesting regulatory complications. Dubai? The word carried weight she wasn't sure she was ready for. Problems with that? No, just it's been a long time since I've traveled for business. Then it's time to get reacquainted with the world you belong in. The conviction in his voice was compelling, almost hypnotic. Illa found herself imagining what it would feel like to use her skills again to engage in the complex intellectual challenges that had once defined her professional life. When would you need an answer? Now the simple word hit her like a physical blow. Now the Dubai deal is moving quickly. If you're going to be part of this company, you need to be Alan. Half measures don't work in my business. Illa looked between Khalil and David, seeing expectation and encouragement in their faces. This was it, the moment that would determine whether she remained trapped in survival mode or took the leap back into the life she'd lost. All right, she said, the words coming out stronger than she'd expected. I accept. Khalil's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face from intimidating to almost boyishly pleased. Excellent. David will handle the employment paperwork and arrange your travel documents. We leave for Dubai tomorrow night. This is too important to delegate entirely. I'll be overseeing the negotiations personally. His expression grew serious. Are you ready for this, Illa? Because once we start, there's no hiding behind other people's expectations. Your work will be scrutinized by some of the sharpest legal minds in international business. The question was both a challenge and an invitation. Illa felt years of suppressed ambition rising like a tide in her chest. I'm ready, she said, and for the first time in 2 years, she actually believed it. As she left the Al Rashid building an hour later, employment contracts signed and travel arrangements being expedited, Layla caught her reflection in the lobby's polished marble. The woman looking back at her appeared different somehow. Straighter shoulders, brighter eyes, the faint suggestion of purpose returning to her posture. Tomorrow night, she would board a plane to Dubai as a senior legal consultant for one of the world's most successful companies. 6 months ago, she'd been serving coffee and dodging creditors. The transformation felt surreal, almost too good to be true. But as the Manhattan evenings settled around her, Illa allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges awaited in Dubai, she was no longer just surviving. She was finally ready to live again. The first-class cabin of Emirates Flight 202 felt like a cocoon of luxury as it sliced through the night sky toward Dubai. Illa had never flown first class before. Even during her successful years in London, she'd been too practical to spend money on such extravagances. Now surrounded by cream leather and polished wood, she felt both grateful and slightly overwhelmed. Khalil sat across the aisle, his laptop open, and fingers flying across the keyboard with the focused intensity that seemed to define everything he did. Occasionally, he would glance her way, offering a brief smile or checking if she needed anything, but mostly he was absorbed in the endless stream of emails and documents that apparently never stopped flowing in his world. Nervous about returning to Dubai, she asked during one of his brief breaks from typing. Nervous number Khalil closed his laptop and turned his full attention to her. But returning home always brings up memories I prefer to keep buried. Bad memories. Complicated ones. His expression grew distant. Dubai is where I learned that survival sometimes requires becoming someone you never intended to be. The vulnerability in his admission surprised her. During their brief time working together in New York, Khalil had projected unwavering confidence and control. This glimpse of uncertainty made him seem more human, more approachable. Is that why you left? I left because I had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Sometimes that's what it takes to build something meaningful. Illa understood that logic intimately. Her own exile from London had been driven by similar desperation, the need to rebuild from absolute destruction. What about you? Khalil asked. Any second thoughts about diving back into international law? Dozens, she admitted. But they're outnumbered by the desire to use my brain for something more complex than memorizing wine lists. His laugh was warm and genuine. I imagine that was frustrating. You have no idea. Do you know how many times I wanted to correct customers who mispronounced chat dem or explain why their wine choice was completely wrong for their meal? But you didn't? No. Invisible people don't correct their betters. The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. 2 years of suppressing her intelligence, her education, her natural instincts to engage and analyze it had taken a toll she was only beginning to recognize. You're not invisible anymore, Khalil said quietly. No, now I'm conspicuous, which is almost worse. Your legal team in Dubai is going to wonder why you hired someone with no references and a mysterious employment gap. Let me worry about my legal team. Your job is to focus on the telecommunications acquisition. Khalil reached for a thick folder from his briefcase. Sharif Communications, founded 15 years ago by Hassan Sharif, built into one of the region's most successful independent telecom companies. On paper, it's exactly the kind of acquisition that would expand our Middle Eastern operations significantly. On paper, there are regulatory complications that don't make sense. Licensing issues, government contract disputes, personnel problems that seem designed to devalue the company right before we're scheduled to make an offer. Illa felt her analytical mind engaging the familiar thrill of puzzle solving beginning to override her nervousness. You think it's orchestrated? I think Hassan Sharif is either the unluckiest businessman in Dubai or someone is deliberately sabotaging his company to force a low-ball sale, and you want me to figure out which. I want you to dig deeper than our Dubai legal team has been able to. Sometimes an outsider's perspective reveals things that local experts miss. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and Illa gripped her armrest as the cabin shuddered. Khalil noticed her discomfort and reached across the aisle, his hand covering hers in a gesture that was both comforting and surprisingly intimate. "It's just air pockets," he said softly. "Nothing to worry about." The warmth of his palm against her skin sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through her. This close, she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the slight stubble that suggested he'd been working since dawn, the way his mouth curved when he was trying to be reassuring rather than commanding. "Sorry," she said, not pulling her hand away. I'm usually a better flyer than this. Stress affects people differently. You're taking on a lot of changes very quickly. The concern in his voice was genuine, not the polite interest of an employer checking on a subordinate. It was the kind of personal attention that made dangerous feelings stir to life in her chest. "I can handle it," she said, finally, withdrawing her hand from his. "I know you can, but that doesn't mean you should have to handle it alone." Before she could respond to that loaded statement, the flight attendant appeared to refresh their drinks and inform them that they would begin descent into Dubai within the hour. The moment of intimacy dissolved, replaced by the practical realities of business travel and upcoming challenges. But as Layla looked out the window at the lights of the Persian Gulf beginning to appear below, she couldn't shake the memory of Khalil's hand on hers, or the way his concern had felt both professional and deeply personal. The Dubai International Airport was a monument to global connectivity and Middle Eastern ambition. Even at midnight, it bustled with the energy of a city that never truly slept. As they moved through customs and toward the waiting car service, Layla marveled at the mix of traditional and modern that defined everything around them. "First time in the UAE?" Khalil asked as their driver navigated through traffic toward the city center. "First time anywhere in the Middle East, actually. My parents immigrated to London when I was very young." "Then you're in for an experience. Dubai is unlike anywhere else in the world. It's what happens when unlimited ambition meets unlimited resources." Through the car windows, the city revealed itself in layers of light and shadow. Traditional souks nestled alongside gleaming skyscrapers, while luxury hotels rose from the desert like monuments to human determination. It was beautiful and overwhelming and completely foreign. Yet something about it felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. "It suits you," Isla said without thinking. "What do you mean? The city, it's ambitious, successful, but also slightly untamed, like it's still becoming whatever it's meant to be." Khalil studied her profile as she gazed out at the passing skyline. "That's a surprisingly accurate assessment from someone who's been here for all of 30 minutes. I'm good at reading between lines. It's part of being a lawyer." "Former lawyer, current legal consultant," she corrected with a small smile. "I'm reclaiming my professional identity." Remember the hotel, the Burj Al Arab, appeared before them like something from a fantasy novel, its sail-shaped silhouette illuminated against the dark Persian Gulf. Illa had seen pictures, of course, but the reality was breathtaking. "We'll be staying in the royal suite," Khalil said casually as they entered the opulent lobby. "It has separate bedrooms and a full office setup for our work." The clarification was unnecessary, but appreciated. Despite his assurances about the professional nature of their relationship, being alone with Khalil in one of the world's most romantic cities felt charged with potential complications. "The Hassan Sharif meeting is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning," he continued as they rode the elevator to their floor. "That gives you tonight to review the files and tomorrow morning to formulate initial impressions. And after the meeting we dig deeper. Hassan strikes me as a man with secrets, and secrets have a way of revealing themselves when the right pressure is applied." The suite was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Gulf furnishings that belonged in a palace and enough space for a small conference. But what struck Layla most was the way Khalil moved through it with casual familiarity, as if luxury of this magnitude was simply expected rather than extraordinary. "The office space is through here," he said, leading her to a separate room equipped with computers, printers, and a conference table overlooking the water. "Everything you need should be available, but let me know if you require additional resources. This is perfect. Thank you, Ila." Something in his voice made her turn to face him fully. "I want you to know that bringing you here isn't just about the Sharif acquisition. What you did at Lerna. Spotting that fraudulent contract, it reminded me why I got into business in the first place, which was to build something meaningful to create success that wasn't built on other people's failures." His expression grew serious. "In my world, that kind of integrity is rare. I don't want to lose it again." The intensity of his words sent warmth spreading through her chest. This wasn't about professional qualifications or convenient skill sets. This was about something deeper, more personal. "You won't lose it," she said quietly. "I promise." "Good, because tomorrow we're going to discover exactly what Hassan Sharif is hiding. And I have a feeling it's going to test both our principles and our partnership." As Khalil retired to his bedroom, leaving her alone in the office with files full of financial mysteries to unravel, Illa realized she was no longer nervous about the upcoming challenges. Instead, she felt energized, focused, and more alive than she'd been since London. Whatever secrets they uncovered tomorrow, whatever complications arose from working so closely with a man who was becoming dangerously important to her, she was ready. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she belonged. But as she opened the first file on Sharif Communications, a name on the letterhead made her blood freeze. Listed as the company's London legal counsel was Blackstone and Associates, the firm that had destroyed her career and exiled her from the legal profession. The same firm whose senior partners had threatened to ruin her life if she ever practiced law again. And now, somehow, they were connected to Khalil's most important acquisition. The coincidence seemed impossible, which meant it probably wasn't a coincidence at all. Morning in Dubai arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the floor to ceiling windows of their suite. But Illa had been awake for hours, surrounded by documents that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the Sharif Communications acquisition. Khalil found her in the office at 7 a.m. Still in the clothes she'd worn the previous evening, coffee cups scattered across the conference table like archaeological evidence of a sleepless night spent unraveling mysteries. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I couldn't not after what I found." Illa gestured to the papers spread before her like puzzle pieces. "Khalil, this isn't just corporate sabotage. It's something much more complex and much more personal." He poured himself coffee from the service that had appeared sometime during the night and settled into the chair across from her. In the morning light, he looked younger somehow, his hair slightly mussed, and his usual corporate armor replaced by casual elegance. "Tell me Blackstone and Associates has been Sharif Communications London legal counsel for 3 years. The same firm that destroyed my career is directly connected to your biggest acquisition." Layla pushed a contract across the table. "But here's what's interesting. All of their recent legal work has been designed to create problems, not solve them." Khalil studied the document, his expression growing darker with each page. These contract modifications would make the company nearly impossible to acquire cleanly. Exactly. Someone at Blackstone is deliberately sabotaging Hassan Sharif's business, but doing it subtly enough that it looks like organic complications rather than intentional interference. The question is why Illa reached for another file, this one marked with Hassan Sharif's personal information. "I think I know." Hassan's daughter, Amamira Sharif, was a student at Oxford 3 years ago. According to these notes, she was engaged to someone in London before the engagement was abruptly broken. "You think there's a connection to your situation? I think my ex-fiancé's family specializes in destroying people who threaten their interests." The timeline matches perfectly. Amamira's broken engagement, the beginning of Sharif Communications' legal troubles, and my own exile from the profession. Khalil was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that made Illa's stomach clench with dread. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a coldness she'd never heard before. "Are you telling me that bringing you to Dubai has put you in direct contact with the people who ruined your life?" "It's possible. Probably even. And you didn't think to mention this connection last night?" The accusation in his tone stung, but Illa forced herself to remain calm. "I discovered it at 3 this morning. I've been trying to understand the implications before jumping to conclusions. The implications are that I've potentially compromised your safety by bringing you here." Or Illa said, standing and moving to the window overlooking the Persian Gulf. "You've given me the opportunity to finally understand what really happened to me in London." She could feel Khalil watching her, could sense the internal debate between his protective instincts and his business objectives. When he joined her at the window, his presence both comforting and dangerously distracting. We can call off the acquisition, find another telecommunications company, avoid the entire situation. Absolutely not. Her vehemence seemed to surprise him. Layla, no. For 2 years I've been running from shadows and hiding from my own life. If Blackstone and Associates is behind Hassan Sharif's problems, then helping you acquire his company cleanly isn't just good business. It's justice. Justice can be expensive. Are you prepared for what it might cost? She turned to face him, surprised by how close he was standing. Close enough to see the concern in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the morning sunlight. Are you? The question hung between them like a challenge. This wasn't just about business anymore, and they both knew it. This was about trust, about taking risks for each other, about the dangerous territory they'd been approaching since that first night at Leonard. We meet with Hassan in 2 hours, Khalil said. Finally, if you're right about Blackstone's involvement, he's going to need allies more than he realizes. And if I'm wrong now, then we proceed with a standard acquisition and hope your past stays buried. But even as he said it, both of them knew that secrets this tangled rarely stayed buried for long. The offices of Sharif Communications occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Dubai's financial district with panoramic views of the city's ever-expanding skyline. Hassan Sharif met them in a conference room that managed to blend traditional Middle Eastern hospitality with cutting-edge business technology. Hassan himself was a surprise younger than Ila had expected, perhaps 50, with intelligent eyes that seemed to weigh every word before speaking. But what struck her most was the exhaustion that seemed to radiate from him, the weariness of a man fighting battles he didn't fully understand. Mr. Al-Rashid, thank you for considering our company for acquisition, Hassan said as they settled around the polished conference table. I'll be honest. We need this partnership more than pride would normally allow me to admit. Business is business, Hassan. The question is whether we can structure a deal that benefits everyone involved. Khalil's tone was professionally cordial, but Ila could sense his increased alertness. I've brought Ms. Nazir to review the legal complications that seem to be affecting your operations. Hassan's attention shifted to Ila with polite interest. Ms. Nazir, your expertise is in international corporate law. Among other things, I specialize in regulatory compliance and contract analysis. Ila opened her briefcase with deliberate care. I've been reviewing your recent legal documentation, and I have some concerns about the advice you've been receiving. Something flickered in Hassan's expression, hope perhaps, or recognition that someone finally understood his situation. You've identified problems. I've identified patterns. Your London legal counsel has been creating obstacles rather than removing them. Contract modifications that invite regulatory scrutiny, licensing applications that contain deliberate errors, partnership agreements structured to fail. Hassan's face went pale. That's exactly what I've been suspecting, but I couldn't prove it. Why would your own lawyers sabotage your business? Khalil asked, though Ila suspected he already knew the answer. Because they're not really my lawyers, Hassan said quietly. 3 years ago, my daughter Amira was studying at Oxford. She became engaged to a young man from a prominent London legal family. The engagement ended badly with accusations and threats, and suddenly this prestigious firm was offering their services at rates I couldn't refuse. Blackstone and Associates, Ila said. Hassan's surprise was genuine. You know them? Unfortunately, yes. They destroyed my career when I threatened to expose their money laundering operations. The conference room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Dubai traffic. Hassan stared at Ila with dawning understanding, while Khalil's expression grew dangerously cold. James Blackstone? Hassan said, finally. That was the name of Amira's fiancé. When she discovered he was using her to gain access to our family's business connections, she broke the engagement. He threatened to ruin us both. And he's been systematically doing exactly that, Layla confirmed. Using legal expertise to create problems that would force you into a desperate sale, probably to associates of his who would acquire your company at a fraction of its true value. Can you prove this? Khalil asked. Ila reached for her laptop and pulled up the analysis she'd been working on since dawn. Every contract modification, every regulatory complication, every licensing issue can be traced back to advice from Blackstone and Associates. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. More importantly, Hassan said, his voice gaining strength. Can you fix it? I can do better than that. I can expose the entire operation and make sure James Blackstone never manipulates another client. The determination in her voice seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including herself. But as the pieces of the conspiracy became clear, Illa felt something awakening in her that had been dormant since London, the hunger for justice that had driven her to become a lawyer in the first place. "What do you need from us?" Khalil asked. "Access to all of your legal files, communication records with Blackstone, and permission to contact regulatory authorities in both London and Dubai." "Done, Hassan. Anything you need. If there's a chance to save my company and expose these people, I'll give you whatever resources you require." Dim. As they spent the next hour reviewing documents and planning strategy, Illa felt the familiar thrill of complex legal work engaging every facet of her intelligence. This was what she'd been missing during her years of exile, the satisfaction of using her skills to solve meaningful problems and protect innocent people. But more than that, she was aware of Khalil watching her work with something that looked like admiration. When she argued a particularly complex point about regulatory law, his smile was proud. When she identified another layer of Blackstone's deception, his nod conveyed both approval and something warmer. "You're remarkable," he said quietly during a break while Hassan made phone calls to gather additional documents. "I'm doing my job." "No, you're doing what you were meant to do. This is who you really are, isn't it? Not the invisible waitress, not the cautious survivor. This brilliant, fierce advocate who fights for justice." The admiration in his voice made something flutter dangerously in her chest. "I'm the same person I've always been." "Maybe, but now I'm seeing all of you." Before she could respond, her son returned with an expression of grim satisfaction. "I've been in touch with 2 other business owners who used Blackstone and Associates over the past 3 years. Both experienced similar patterns of legal sabotage, followed by mysterious acquisition offers from London-based investors. It's a systematic operation." Layla said they identify successful Middle Eastern businesses, infiltrate their legal processes, create artificial problems, then arrange for associates to acquire the companies at distressed prices. Which means Khalil added that stopping them isn't just about saving Hassan's company. It's about exposing an international fraud operation. And the magnitude of what they were facing settled over the room like a challenge. This wasn't simply a business acquisition anymore. It was a battle against the same forces that had destroyed Illa's life and were now threatening other innocent people. So Hassan said, "What's our next move?" Illa looked between the 2 men who were now depending on her expertise, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of purpose combining into something powerful and transformative. "We give James Blackstone exactly what he deserves," she said. "We expose everything." But as she spoke the words, Illa couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was just beginning, and that James Blackstone wouldn't surrender his profitable conspiracy without consequences that none of them were prepared for. The call came at midnight, shattering the focused quiet of their Dubai hotel suite, where Layla had been working for 18 straight hours to build their case against Blackstone and Associates. Khalil answered on the second ring, his voice immediately alert despite the late hour. "Al-Rashid." Layla watched his expression change from professional attention to cold fury as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he finally hung up, the silence in the room felt ominous. "That was my security team in New York," he said quietly. "Someone broke into my office tonight. Nothing was stolen, but every file related to the Sharif acquisition was photographed." The implications hit Illa like ice water in her veins. "They know we're onto them. It gets worse. David received a call an hour ago from someone claiming to represent your former employers in London. They're threatening legal action if you continue practicing international law." Fear and anger warred in her chest, but anger won. After 2 years of hiding, of accepting defeat, of letting James Blackstone's threats control her life, Ila felt something snap into place that felt like her old self returning. Let them threaten. We have evidence of systematic fraud affecting multiple companies across 2 continents. A few intimidation tactics aren't going to stop us now. Layla, these people destroyed your career once. They could. They could try. She stood and moved to the window, overlooking Dubai's glittering skyline, gathering courage from the city's audacious confidence. But this time, I'm not alone. And this time, I have proof of what they've been doing. Khalil joined her at the window, his presence both protective and encouraging. Are you sure about this? Once we move forward, there's no going back to invisibility. I don't want to be invisible anymore. I want to be exactly who I was, always meant to be a lawyer, who fights for justice no matter how powerful the opposition. The conviction in her voice seemed to surprise them both. But as she spoke, the words, Ila realized they were true. The scared, defeated woman who had fled London was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more determined than she'd ever been before. Then we finished this, Khalil said. All of it. The next morning brought Hassan Sharif to their suite with news that confirmed their worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. His daughter Amira had arrived from London overnight, carrying evidence that would transform their business dispute into an international legal case. Amira Sharif was 25, beautiful in the way that suggested both intelligence and strength, and she radiated the kind of quiet fury that came from being systematically betrayed by someone she trusted with her heart. Ms. Nadia, she said, settling into the conference room chair with determined grace. My father tells me you're the lawyer James Blackstone tried to destroy. Former lawyer, current legal consultant, and yes, James and his father made it very clear that I would never practice law again if I exposed their money laundering operations. Ah, then you understand exactly what kind of man I was engaged to. Amira opened her briefcase with the precise movements of someone who had planned this moment carefully. I brought copies of everything. Personal emails, business communications, recorded phone conversations, 3 years' worth of evidence that James has been using our relationship to infiltrate and sabotage Middle Eastern businesses. The documents Amira spread across the table were devastating. Email threads discussing the Dubai project and neutralizing competition through legal channels recorded conversations where James bragged about manipulating clients into vulnerable positions. Financial records showing payments from mysterious London investors to Blackstone and Associates for consulting services that coincided with each business sabotage. This is conspiracy fraud and extortion, operating across international boundaries. Ella said her legal mind cataloguing charges even as her personal satisfaction grew. With this evidence, we can not only clear your father's company, but expose the entire operation. There's more, Amira said quietly. James didn't just target our family's business. He's been collecting information about dozens of successful Middle Eastern entrepreneurs, their families, their personal relationships. He's building a database of potential targets for future operations. Khalil's expression had grown progressively darker as he reviewed the evidence. This isn't just fraud. It's systematic economic warfare disguised as legal services, which means Layla added feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place that James Blackstone isn't just a corrupt lawyer. He's the center of an international conspiracy designed to destabilize and acquire Middle Eastern businesses through legal manipulation. The magnitude of what they were facing settled over the room like a storm cloud. This wasn't simply about saving Hassan's company or clearing Layla's professional reputation. They were confronting a sophisticated operation that had probably affected hundreds of people and millions of dollars in fraudulent acquisitions. So, what do we do? Hassan asked. Ila looked around the table at the faces depending on her expertise, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of purpose combining into something transformative. We do what James Blackstone never expected, she said. We fight back with the truth. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of international phone calls, legal filings, and strategic planning that reminded Ila why she had fallen in love with law in the first place. Working with regulatory authorities in both London and Dubai, they built a case that was both comprehensive and unassailable. Khalil proved to be not just a supportive employer, but an invaluable partner in the investigation. His business connections opened doors that would have remained closed to a disgraced lawyer working alone, while his strategic mind helped identify weaknesses in Blackstone's operation that pure legal analysis might have missed. The Dubai Financial Services Authority has agreed to freeze all assets connected to Blackstone's Middle Eastern operations, he announced after a particularly crucial phone call. And the London Serious Fraud Office is launching a formal investigation based on the evidence Amira provided. What about the intimidation campaign against me? Illa asked. Handled. My legal team in New York has filed harassment charges, and David is working with international business organizations to publicize what really happened to your career in London. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by something else. The growing awareness that their professional partnership had evolved into something much more personal and complex. It was Khalil who acknowledged the shift first, late on their final night in Dubai, as they worked side by side in the hotel suite's office, surrounded by the evidence of their successful campaign against James Blackstone's conspiracy. Layla, he said, looking up from the laptop where he'd been coordinating with authorities in 3 different countries. I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made her pulse accelerate. What? This he gestured to the documents scattered across their workspace. Working with you like this, watching you reclaim your professional identity and fight for justice. It's made me realize something important, which is that I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a confession and a challenge. Illa felt her heart stop, then resume beating with painful intensity. Khalil, I know it's complicated. I know there are professional considerations and power dynamics and a dozen reasons why this is problematic timing. He stood and moved toward her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. But I also know that watching you work these past few days, seeing your brilliance and your passion, and your absolute commitment to doing what's right, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Ila rose to meet him, her mind racing through implications and complications, even as her heart responded to the sincerity in his voice. I'm falling in love with you too, she said quietly. But you're right about the complications. Are they insurmountable? She studied his face in the soft light from the Dubai skyline, seeing not the intimidating billionaire who had first approached her table at Leonardo, but the man who had trusted her professional judgment, supported her fight for justice, and somehow seen past her carefully constructed invisibility to the person she really was. No, she said, finally. They're just complications, and I'm tired of letting complications control my life. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and launching into adventure simultaneously. All the professional tension and personal attraction that had been building since their first meeting crystallized into something powerful and transformative and absolutely right. So what happens now? She asked when they finally broke apart. Now we go back to New York, finish destroying James Blackstone's operation, and figure out how to build something meaningful together, professionally and personally. Is that what you want? What I want? Khalil said, his hands framing her face with gentle certainty, is to spend the rest of my life working alongside the most brilliant, courageous, and extraordinary woman I've ever met. 3 months later, the business sections of newspapers across 2 continents carried headlines about the international fraud operation that had been exposed by the cooperation between Al Rashid Global Enterprises and regulatory authorities in London and Dubai. James Blackstone and 6 associates were facing criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions, while Hassan Sharif's company had been successfully acquired in a deal that restored its full value and reputation. But for Ila, the most meaningful headline was much smaller and more personal. The announcement in the New York Legal Journal that she had been reinstated to practice law and named as senior legal counsel for Al Rashid Global Enterprises. Any regrets? Khalil asked, as they stood in their new shared office overlooking Manhattan from the 53rd floor of his building, about exposing international fraud saving innocent businesses and getting justice for everyone James Blackstone tried to destroy. Illa smiled as she straightened her new business cards. None whatsoever. And about us? She turned from the window to find him watching her with the same intensity that had first intrigued her months ago in a restaurant booth, but now tempered with something warmer and deeper about falling in love with my brilliant, demanding, occasionally impossible boss who saw through my disguise and gave me back my professional identity. She moved toward him with the confident grace of a woman who was finally exactly where she belonged. That's the best decision I've ever made. When he pulled her into his arms, surrounded by the evidence of their shared success and the promise of their shared future, Illa realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest moments. A contract that needs translating a fraud, that needs exposing, and two people brave enough to trust each other with the truth. I love you, Layla Nazir, brilliant lawyer, and the woman who saved me from the biggest mistake of my career. I love you too, Khalil al-Rashid, impossible billionaire, and the man who saved me from invisibility. And as Manhattan sparkled around them like a promise of endless possibilities, they began planning not just their next acquisition, but their wedding, their future in the empire. They would build together on the foundation of justice, integrity, and a love that had transformed them both.